I'm out there waving a black flag of protest because I felt so angry about my friend's death. I felt so desperate and so alienated from the political process that I thought I should wave the black flag, which I think is a sign not only of anarchy, but also of anger and discontent.
Yeah, by the way, just for the record, I wanted to make it clear that I didn't believe for a moment what that guy told me. I just had to bring it up for her to...
Well, let me just make one more comment about that.
Ludicrous.
Let me make one more comment about that.
Talk about language, I go for it.
That's okay. I just wanted to say, I think it's good that you brought that up again, because it should be pointed out that a lot of the American public believe these lies about rocks and bottles and all this. I think the reason is this. When the national news media descended on Kent that afternoon, May 4th in the afternoon, after the murders were done, and I think it was murder, I want to make that clear. Cold-blooded, calculated murder upon orders. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Now, after that happened, then here comes all the national news media. And meanwhile, thousands and even millions of students are going on strike across the country. 760 universities and colleges shut down in the first 2 weeks of May 1970. 5 million students joined the national student strike. So there's a national uproar that was going on. The media comes here, and the general of the National Guard went on national television that afternoon, and he said there was a sniper, which was proven to be a total lie. Even the FBI admitted that later. They said that there were all these rocks and bottles being thrown, and eyewitness testimony and the photographs show that the guardsmen stood there very coolly and very calmly, and they weren't hiding from any rocks or bottles. They stood there very coolly and just shot down the hill, mostly not on the hill where they wounded 4, but out into the distant parking lot where the students were killed at distances from 275, 350, 390, and 400 feet away from the guard. They fired mostly way out into the distant parking lot. So there was no sniper, rocks were not being thrown, their lives were not in danger. But the general said there was a sniper, there were all these objects being thrown, and he concluded by saying the students were only 3 feet away from us. He said if we didn't shoot at that moment...
That's an obvious lie.
Yeah, he said the students were going to come over, he said they were going to take our guns away from us and use them on us. He said we had no choice but to shoot. Now, all the photographs came out in Life magazine the next week. It showed no student anywhere near the guard. In fact, the closest student was 60 feet away, giving the finger, Joe Lewis.
Oh, okay.
And I was down near the bottom of the hill. I was 225 feet away when I was shot. Now, beyond me in the parking lot behind me is where all 4 were killed. My friend, for example, Jeff Miller, was a personal friend. This is him on the famous photo right here.
Oh, okay.
And he was shot. The bullet went through his cheek here and literally blew his brains out the back of his head. He was killed instantly. He was about maybe 50 feet behind me.
Sandra Stewart was not involved in the rally at all, was she?
Yeah, let's talk about the 4th.
Yeah, here's the new issue of the Kent Free Press, our alternative paper here in Kent, put out by my organization, the Kent May 4th Center. Sandy Scheuer and Bill Schroeder were merely bystanders. They were not participating in the demonstration. They were watching. And they were almost 400 feet away when they were shot and killed.
Yeah.
Sandy was a sorority member from the Alpha Zeta Delta sorority, walking to her class.
Yeah.
The bullet went through her throat when she was killed, almost 400 feet away. Bill Schroeder was also walking nearby her, and he was the #2 ROTC cadet, academically, ranked #2 in the military science program.
Shot one of their own.
And they shot one of their own in the back. He was killed, also a bystander. Now, Allison and Jeff were participating in the protest. Allison was about 350 feet away with her boyfriend. She was trying to get behind a car at the time of the shootings, and a bullet passed through her arm and went into her chest, and she bled to death during the next half hour in the parking lot. And Jeff Miller was participating in the protest, and he was looking up the hill. Earlier, he had been shouting at the guard, and I think there were some photos of him raising his finger at the guard also. But he was 275 feet away. I don't think any of these students were a threat to the guard. And the big mystery is, if they were afraid of being overrun, or if they were afraid of a sniper or rocks, why would they shoot the vast majority of their bullets way out into a distant parking lot? The answer is because that's where they knew the most militant and vocal and radical students were.
That's where they were massed.
That's right. That's where the gathering of students was. And so that's why they fired into that distant parking lot, and that's why all these 4 students were killed there. None of those students could remotely be seen as a threat to the guard. But the fact is, the general went on national television. He told all these lies. And then down through the years, the lies become multiplied and exaggerated.
And nobody knows what to believe anymore.
Well, that's right. But we're still working. The Kent May 4th Center.
It seems like you're doing real well too these days.
I think we are.
The 20th anniversary.
I think we've got a lot of momentum. We have a great deal of credibility.
Yeah.
Even though we were attacked this week viciously in the conservative national magazine called The New Republic, the May 13th edition. They have a very, very nasty article, which is reprinted today in the Akron Beacon Journal on May 3rd.
Is that the one we had of that guy's making real sarcastic remarks in the newspaper? Yeah,
it's in the Akron Beacon Journal today. But anyway, the point is, I think when you're effective in your work, you know, if we were ineffective, they would just ignore us.
Right.
But they see that we are potentially a very grave threat to the cover-up of murder at Kent State. And I'm telling you right now, just as there are many people that are working on the John F. Kennedy assassination or the Martin Luther King assassination, for example, people are still trying to uncover those crimes. We're doing the same thing here at Kent. The difference is at Kent, there were a lot more people involved, and we know who they are. And I think we have a much better chance of solving this crime. We're going to get to the bottom of it.
Right on, man.
Really?
It seems to me that, you know, with this Gulf War, that they really want to clamp down any sort of student activism, what's going on. They just really want to put the clamp down on this country, you know. Bush, in particular, his New World Order, doesn't like that sort of thing.
Well, you know, Dave, I'm glad you brought up student activism, because our work at the Kent May 4th Center does not just simply focus on a nostalgic, historic tragedy from 21 years ago. We're concerned about the Kent State incident, but we also talk about Jackson State, Orangeburg College, Southern University, the University of Kansas, and other students that were killed in California, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and so forth. We talk about those events from the past, but we also talk about more recent examples internationally, such as Tiananmen Square, or in South Africa, or Eastern Europe, or Central America. And we not only talk about those things that have to do with what we call excessive force, we also talk about student activism. Our group here at Kent, called the Kent May 4th Center, we have an equal focus on the phenomenon of student activism, because we think May of 1970 just doesn't stand for a tragedy. It also stands for a massive popular uprising of students at Kent and across the country, which stopped the war in Vietnam, and which I think continues to this day. The student movement is alive and well in America now, and we're trying to take the message out to people that there's a legitimate, lasting tradition of student activism in America. Since the colonial era, in the 1600s, there was student activism, and there's still student activism. And we think that there are a lot of positive and negative lessons for students to learn, so that they can more effectively continue the tradition and remain active and help to bring some changes in our country. So we're very concerned about student activism and helping to teach the lessons, the positive and negative lessons, so that the student movement can continue and grow. And we think that by the end of this decade, by the year 2000, there's going to be a new national student organization similar to SDS. I think SDS was very effective on hundreds of campuses. They had hundreds of thousands of members. Before this decade is over, I think it's clear we're going to have a student movement in America that's going to make the 1960s look like a picnic. And we're trying to make our contribution. We want to help guarantee the continuation of that student activism.
Yeah, I think it'll work, because we have the veterans like yourself from the 60s who've been through it all before, who can lead, you not necessarily lead, but who have been there and who are still involved to aid the students. They're not like on the forefront anymore like they were back in the 60s. The students were, you know, now it's across the whole age spectrum, you know. Shit, I'm 40 or 42, you know, we're getting up there in years. And there's people older than us who are involved in the movement, so, you know, hell yeah, by the year 2000.
I think you raise a good point, because in the 60s, when we were active here in the United States, we didn't really have a model to follow or to base our activism upon. So we made a lot of mistakes. You know, I think the Weatherman phenomenon, they were too militant, they were too extreme, too narrow in their appeal and their ideology. And I think that those are some important lessons that have been learned now, and the students nowadays won't repeat the mistakes of the 60s. So in a way, they're standing upon the legacy of the 60s, and they're going to easily surpass the 1960s here in the 1990s.
I think that they probably learned the lesson that violence doesn't work, because they have, like Jim Morrison said, they have the guns. You know, you can't, violent protest really doesn't work.
Yeah, they got the guns, but we got the numbers.
Yeah.
We're going to win. Yeah, we're taking over.
Right.
Well, I'm a big Jim Morrison fan. I saw the movie too. It was a very good movie. That was the first concert I ever saw, was the Doors. Those were the days for music, you know, the 60s. I remember I saw Led Zeppelin's first tour, the Rolling Stones, Jefferson Airplane, Neil Young, and those were some good days for music and for culture. It was an exciting time, but you know, it was a dangerous time too. The draft was a big threat to people, the war in Vietnam. So those were exciting times, but they were dangerous times.
Yeah, I joined up. I came to this country in 1971. Okay, so I missed Kent State, but I joined the Air Force like an idiot, the United States Air Force in 1971, and it's just a back up.
Okay.
And you know, I didn't get sent to Vietnam, but you know, there's a lot of, particularly in the barracks. I was on the barracks, you know. Everybody's smoking dope and shit. Nobody even give a damn about the military. And we try, and they're big things to grow your hair long, you know, because they really want short hair, you know. There's a lot of activism in the military. I'd like to point out that during the Vietnam War, even here in the States, there was a lot of people protesting against the war in any way they could.
Yeah.
You know, just because someone's in the military doesn't.
That's right. I think that's an important point to bring out. This anti-war activism was very strong in the military, not only in this country on the army bases and the military bases, but in Vietnam. A lot of the soldiers in the bush, the infantrymen that I've talked to, my friends that went over to Vietnam, told me many stories about how the troops in the field were so fed up with that war in Vietnam, they were refusing to follow orders. They were openly defying their officers and sometimes even taking actions against the officers, shall we say. So I think that we helped to stop the war with our activism here in America, but the soldiers themselves also, I think, in a big way helped to stop that war because they were just refusing to fight. So I think that the Vietnam Syndrome, even though George Bush now tries to say the Vietnam Syndrome is dead, I think the Vietnam Syndrome is alive and well. Never again will our country or our people allow thousands and thousands of young men and women to be sent off to a foreign war of intervention, an immoral or an unjust war like Vietnam. So I think that the Vietnam legacy is alive and well, and this most recent example of the Persian Gulf, I think as each day goes by, people are starting to see that the environmental damage, the refugee problems, the costs just were not worth it. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, nonviolence is the way. Nonviolence in the student movement, but also nonviolence in the international realm. We have to stop, I think, clearly fighting these kinds of wars, whether it's the Gulf War or Vietnam.
I have to cut down on my big point. I thought about it. The only way to stop this sort of action is stop selling arms to these people, you know, conventional arms. If they can make bows and arrows on their own, fine, they can fight amongst themselves. But we don't have to ship them howitzers and all this good stuff. F-18s, they can hardly fly.
That's right.
You know,
that's a good point.
Well, anyway, let's go a break here.
I wanted to say that. I was going to say that the yellow ribbon's turning gray now.
No, it's definitely
Yellow ribbon's turning gray.
Well, one of our members of our board of directors from the Commemorating Force Center is going to be speaking possibly tonight, and for sure tomorrow. And he's going to address that exact issue about this shallow patriotism, which I think is about 3,000 miles wide and about 1 inch deep all across the country. It's very illusory, and he's going to be dealing with this issue from the point of view of our group, the Kent May 4th Center, tomorrow.
Yeah, I work at B.F. Goodrich factory, okay, in Fort Wayne. This is our headquarters here in Akron.
Yeah, right.
But anyway...
my father worked at Goodyear.
All right. Yeah, tire regroupers. Anyway, what I want to say was that the people in the factory, they put the flags up and they wear the hats with the pins on it, and there's yellow ribbons tied around every light post all the way out to the damn main gate, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of bullshit, but it seems to me that even the people are holding back while the war was going on. They were holding back. They weren't really, God damn it, kick some fucking Arabs' ass. They weren't like that. They were just sort of watching and waiting. You know, even the ones who were pro-war, they weren't really for it. You know, like you say, it was only that thick.
Yeah, it's pretty clear it was a war for oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of blind faith patriotism. You know,
that's right.
Well, people are waking
a lot of ignorance of the fact of the criminality of the government and the bad foreign policy.
Yeah, people are starting to wake up. I think after the 1980s, the Reagan years, people were content not to pay much attention to what was going on, but now we're facing some serious crises in our country with the economy. And I think this is what's going to wake people up. It's unfortunate that it takes tough times to do that, but
Well, it gets me.
better late than never, huh?
As late as a bit, you know, like the Reagans, it's been going on ever since Nixon, at least as far as I know, the way they do one thing and say another. Now these, well, Carter was running for president against Reagan in 1980. They say that Reagan had a backdoor channel through William Casey to Iran to say, well, don't let these hostages go until after the election. You
Right.
know,
That's starting to come out, isn't it?
Yeah. Jimmy Carter himself is calling for an investigation of it.
That's great. Well, I think George Bush is tainted with it. Maybe we'll have to impeach him pretty soon. I hope so.
Wouldn't that be nice?
I think he should be impeached, actually, if only because of the most recent war in the Gulf. I think it was a criminal action. It was overkill. He slaughtered a lot of innocent people.
Right.
That's why I want to ask, who's the enemy? Why do we need 50% of our tax money going to the military machine? Who is the enemy?
A volunteer army of mostly minority groups.
1984, man.
Who are so stricken with poverty, they feel they have no choice for a career but to join the military. You know, and they don't volunteer for hell. They volunteer for the benefits they see in the military. They don't volunteer for hell, but when they're on the battlefield, they realize that war is hell, and they didn't volunteer for that, right?
Like those guys in Louisiana. They all wanted to go confidential objector status, so I guess they're thrown in jail now, you know, the guardsmen down there. Well, I want to call a break here, because you've got to get going, and I hope we can pick this up, maybe, you know...
Tomorrow or Sunday.
Yeah.
I hope so, too.
Because here's what I'd like to ask you about the memorial and how it's been going, all right?
All right, that's
and get to where we're at right now.
That's fine, yeah.
And also, how this has changed your life, because you obviously leave the Kent before. What will you been doing outward, you know?
Right.
All right. And we'll also talk about the people who complain in these newspapers. Well, Kent State is just an average Midwestern university. We don't want to be a symbol for the anti-war movement.
Well, we are a symbol here, and I think that we're trying to send out a message to people that just because there was a tragedy here, that doesn't mean that we should just turn around and forget about it and accept it like there were some students that were killed here by a bolt of lightning from the sky or a runaway truck or something. Yeah. And I think there are some serious lessons to be learned here so that we can try to prevent this. Yeah. And then we can say that those 4 students didn't die in vain.
Tragedy.
So it's a big burden, but I think we're addressing it properly.
Tragedy is not exactly a very good term for outright murder.
Do you find that you get a lot of support from the students?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. You'll be meeting some of the students tonight.
Okay.
We're going to take our camera out to the center.
Great.
Will Dean be around?
No, I don't think Dean's coming out this year, although he may, I don't know.
Dean Canfora?
Dean Taylor.
Oh, I'm thinking...
Paralyzed and wise down. Let's see.
Well, I'll be seeing you at the Kiva at 8 o'clock anyway, and you can film in there too.
Yeah,
I
told him how we could get in there.
Yeah, I know.
That new t-shirt too.
Yeah, it's a nice new t-shirt.
You know,
$10.
During the time I was 11, and during the murders of Kent State, I was like 14. So, but I was a hip kid, you know.
No doubt.
And I knew that.
I can tell that right now.
I knew that something. Yeah, I knew that something was going on, and I knew what side I was on, man, and I've been committed ever since, you know. And I never did grow up and behave myself.
Right on, bro. Estimates of the crime.
Shadows of the evening crawl across the year. You walk across the floor with the flower in your hand, trying to tell me no one understands. Trading your hours for a handful of dimes. Gonna make it, baby, in our prime. Get together one more time. 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 Together, we gotta get it all together, get the whole thing together. I tell you, we gotta get it all together. Pretty good. All right.
What's happening, people? Reverend Dr. X at your service. I am the Reverend Dr. X, the generic, eclectic, psychedelic metaphysician. I am founder of the first church of pretentious over-emotionalism and prefabricated consciousness. There is more to this shit than meets the nostrils. Take it from me. Some have called me a bastard of the mystic farts. Actually, Todd and I are on our way to Kent, Ohio for the 23rd anniversary commemoration and prayer in honor of the martyrs of the peace movement who were murdered by the National Guard on that sunny spring day, May 4th, 1970. And we will be conducting interviews with parents, family members, and friends of those students, some who just can't forget. Even though they might like to, they can't. Well, we're doing a follow-up interview with my good friend Alan Canfora, who is among the 9 students that were wounded. So many are aware that there were 4 students killed without actually noting that they were murdered, without knowing that there were also those 9 others that were wounded. We hope to be with Dean Kaler, who's been committed to a wheelchair paralyzed from the waist down since that day. It's hard for me to imagine that anyone could think, can he forget? When he knows in that wheelchair every day, it was because of that one day in 1970 that he's been in that wheelchair paralyzed. Because I am acquainted with family members, friends, and parents, and wounded students, I share their memory, and I know the meaning of our prayers together. It is very important to my life. And I know I'll be there every year, unless the pigs put me in jail for being a hippie or something.
Great.
It's Rita Rubin Long, and I've come to Kent State from Portland, Maine. I was a student here in 1970.
Rita, what does Kent State mean to you? Why do you keep coming back?
Well, for me, it's a place that where I went to school and learned a lot about how our government really does its business. And when I knew that, and I knew about the Vietnam War and how wrong it was a place where I made my stand and said, this is wrong and you've got to stop. And it's a place where I saw friends and other people that were shot, some were killed.
If you could reflect on the atmosphere of the university today and yesterday when you were a student, what would you feel was the main difference?
Well, I think a lot of things in a way are the same. There's seem to be a lot of students that just going about their daily life, you know, and they go to their fraternities and they have things on their window, and you know, they're just in college and enjoying themselves. And then there's a small group of students who are maybe politically aware and are trying to express that.
Mm-hmm. What, in terms of your introduction to politics and your introduction to perhaps the activism of that day, what brought that out in you? What triggered your involvement?
I think I was aware of the news. I became aware of the civil rights movement. Although when I was in high school, I was just your normal, average cheerleader. And every class that I took, U.S. history, I really didn't question. I just, you know, was a sort of innocent youngster, and I believed what I heard. And then as I got older and a little more aware, I started learning about civil rights. And then I went to Woodstock, and I heard a lot of music on rock and roll that just kind of talked about life, and also just with the war in Vietnam and people being drafted. And my brother was sort of secretly over there in 1965 and came back with an addiction to heroin. I think those kind of things just really raised my own awareness.
So it was a conglomeration of different events and, in fact, personal?
Mm-hmm. And then when I came here to Kent, I transferred as a sophomore. I would go to the SDS meetings to learn. And I learned a different history of the U.S. that I was never aware of. And I just felt more strongly that I should say something about this, and I should say it's wrong and try to stop the war.
If you could tell this generation of college students anything about your experience and what it means to you to be concerned about the government or concerned about foreign policy, what would you tell them to?
I don't really know what I tell them. I think people should just be conscious, not believe everything they hear, not believe everything that's reported, because things certainly aren't reported correctly. You have to do a little investigation, find things out for yourself. But I think that the thing that I really feel is that 4 people died here at Kent State, and that life is really a precious thing. And for students today to find out what it is that they care about, what it is they have a passion about, and to live and enjoy their life, and try to take advantage of the time they have being alive. And if they feel they want to get involved politically, or help care for the earth, or try to change things, then I think that's great. But I think that life is very important, and that's one of the things that I've learned from being here, is that people don't come back. And one of the students in particular was just a very happy, full of life, always kind of, kept you entertained in a really joyful way. And I think that it's really important to find that in life.
But we're talking about Kent State, 1970. And I met with Dr. Carol Cartwright recently, and she said to me, "How can you still feel such a sense of urgency? How can you not feel a sense of urgency when no one has ever paid for what happened here? And there are still people who believe that it was just something that happened, an accident, a tragedy." National Guardsmen opened fire and killed 4 people here 23 years ago, and wounded 9, because we had gone through that metamorphosis of awareness, because we had taken a stand about something very, very important, and we changed the course of history that day. I really admire every person who happens to be in this room. It's a small gathering, but it makes me feel good to see every face that's in this room.
Okay, I'd like to echo what some people have said, but maybe just make it a bit more personal. The Vietnam War really did determine the consciousness, I think, of most people in this country during that time period. Either you were for the war or you were against the war. And people like President Nixon and Governor Rhodes, as long as they could divide the country, and they had a majority of the votes, and they kept getting elected, they continued to drive that wedge and create this big division in our society. A lot of people ask me, well, how many people at Kent State were there on May 4th? There were maybe 1,000 or 1,500, which means that about 95% of the Kent State students weren't out there, just like 95% of them aren't here tonight. But the fact that we were out there, even though we were the minority, we were just like a growing number of people across the country. We took a stand against a war which was still supported by the majority of the people in this country. It was risky back then to have a little bit of long hair if you were a guy, or to wear bell-bottoms on this campus. At that time in 1970, you were in a real minority. And when you saw somebody who was like you, it was like a kindred spirit type thing, you could really relate. And I know that's coming back here now, and I can see it on the campus even here in 1993. A similar kind of a little subculture that has something in common. But it was the war mainly that determined your consciousness and your behavior and your lifestyle back in those days. There were other issues too, like the civil rights movement. The women's movement was very strong. The whole country was politicized. So when I graduated from high school in 1967, I believed everything the government told me. I supported the war. I wasn't too much concerned about civil rights or the women's movement or any of this. I went to the Kent State branch in Wadsworth, and within my first week of the class in political science, the professor said, well, probably everybody in here is against the war. I wasn't. I was for the war. And I started to really think then, maybe I should reconsider. Maybe I should look beneath the surface. And so I did. And then right after that was the Chicago Convention. Thousands of students and young people were beaten in the streets of Chicago in August of 1968. I saw that on TV and I thought to myself, something's very wrong in this country. And that really started to wake me up. A month later I came here to Kent State and I joined the Young Democrats because Hubert Humphrey was running against Richard Nixon in the fall of '68. And quickly I quit the Young Dems and I joined the SDS, as Rita mentioned earlier, Students for a Democratic Society. They started out with about 6 people here in the fall of '68, and by the next spring they had 2,000 marching in the rain, defending them when they were being kicked off campus. So that's how Kent State, I think, went through this metamorphosis. And I was part of that, and little did I know that I would go from the Young Dems to the SDS and anti-war protests, and ultimately get shot here on May 4th. I had no idea when I first joined Kent State as a student that I would be compelled to participate in this kind of a historical time period here, or to be a victim, not by anything that I chose on that day. My roommate also was shot and wounded by coincidence through the foot. So it was a very difficult time to be young. It was exciting too, though. I mean, I can remember 1968, 69, within a few months seeing The Doors, Janis Joplin, the Jefferson Airplane, Neil Young, a few months later Led Zeppelin. This was all very exciting, but at the same time it was a very dangerous time to be young in America. I guess we're all lucky because we survived. But I don't envy anybody nowadays. It's a different situation. You're not facing a lot of ammunition, you're not facing a war, but with the economic problems, it's also very difficult for the students of today. Times have changed, the issues have changed, but I think students are still basically the same today.
G.I. John, G.I. John, here he is, your only son.
That's right, kiddies. Here he is, the expendable G.I. Johnny, our American hero. Just think of the hours of fun you will have playing with G.I. Johnny and his nurse, Nancy.
There he is, march along, dying with the Vietcong.